And welcome back to another podcast with Mr. Hagan. And on the last two podcasts, we have been looking at the difference between quantity supplied and supply. And let's just kind of review that a little bit, just so we have kind of a quick way to identify the difference between these things. So some things that go together. Anytime that you see a change in the price, anytime that happens, that you get a change in the price, anytime you move along the supply curve, you're going to call that quantity supplied. Those three things are always going to go together. Change in the price over here, move along the curve, change in quantity supplied. That terminology will always go together. On the other side, over here, whenever the price doesn't change, the price stayed the same. It didn't move. What did move was the curve. So whenever the price doesn't move, but the curve does, you get a shift in the curve, that's going to be called a change in supply. So those three things are going to go together. Price doesn't change, shift the curve, change in supply. Those things are always going to go together. Now, we take all of that together and we call this the law of supply. The law of supply. The law of supply says this, that whenever the price of a good goes up, the quantity that producers bring to market will go up. And that kind of makes sense. People are attracted to produce things when the price goes up. And on the other hand, if you get a decrease in the price, then that will cause people to decrease the amount of that good that they produce. Ceteris paribus, everything else held equal. So let's think about it this way. This right here is this relationship between price and quantity. When you get a change in the price, increase in the price causes an increase in the quantity, or a decreased price causes a decrease in quantity. That's just this graph right here. That's moving along the curve. That's a change in quantity supplied. That's the moving along the curve part of the law of supply. And then the second part, the ceteris paribus over here, that's the shifting of the curve. That's the shifting of the curve. That's the everything else held equal. And when things are no longer held equal, then this curve is going to start shifting back and forth. So the ceteris paribus part, that's going to be right here. That's going to be this graph. That's going to be the change in supply. So the first part of the law of supply is changing in the price, quantity supplied. And then the second part of the law of supply is a change in something other than price, which we call a change in supply. A change in supply. So there's the law of supply, which is very similar to the concept of the law of demand. We have now laid out the demand curve and the supply curve, and on some future podcasts we will put supply and demand together, and that's when we can really begin to understand how markets work. Thanks for joining me for another podcast. It's been Mr. Hagan, and we'll see you on the next podcast.